Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our second grad school demystified event of this year. This one is now centered around humanities and social sciences. My name is Lizzie, and the outreach committee is so excited to bring you this event where you will get to hear from grad students in the humanities field and get to ask them any questions about their grad school experience. This event will be recorded and uploaded onto CURB's YouTube channel very shortly after the event, so stay tuned for that. I will now pass it off to Jen.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer. I'm one of the other co-chairs for the Outreach Committee. Today, there will be 3 rounds of questions for this event. First will be round 1, which is the pre-graduate school experience, round 2, which is the application process, and round 3, which is life in graduate school. For each round, we're going to have a little mini Q&A after the assigned questions for each round. And if you do have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Try to keep them on the topic of the round, at the topics I mentioned before. And at the very, very end, there'll also be a general Q&A if you have questions that don't fit in specific rounds or if you didn't get a chance to ask any questions in those rounds. So I'll pass it off to DeAndrea to introduce the panelists.
Thank you, Jen. So today we'll be hearing from 7 grad students who are in fields ranging from government to Asian studies to archaeology and more. And if the audience would like to contact panelists after the event, the panelists' emails will show up on their screen as they speak. Now, panelists may begin by introducing yourselves with your name and your field of study.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Lagrasta. I'm a second-year master's student in archaeology.
Hi, I'm Anna Whittemore, and I am a second-year graduate student in anthropology.
Hello, my name's Chris. I'm a second year in government department, PhD.
Hi, I'm Samantha. I'm a 5th-year PhD candidate in the Department of Classics, the philology concentration.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Lobel. I'm a first-year MA student in the Asian Studies program, focusing on social sciences, specifically law, government, and anthropology. And this is actually my second stint in grad school. I was also at the Hopkins Nanjing Center in Nanjing, China for a year, and happy to talk more about either experience.
Hi, my name is Neo. I'm a second-year PhD student in the government department.
Hi, I'm Krithika, and I'm a 5th-year PhD candidate in the Department of Literatures and English.
Okay, so we'll be starting with round 1 right now, about pre-graduate school. So for question 1, I guess we can start with, how do I know if graduate school is right for me? So yeah, any of the panelists can feel free to answer.
I guess I can start. So I can only speak for my personal experience with this, so I'm not going to tell you exactly what's right for you, but I'll tell you what was right for me. So I graduated with an undergraduate degree, a double major in anthropology and Spanish from University of Virginia in 2015. Right when I was getting ready to graduate, I knew that graduate school was kind of on the horizon for me because I really enjoyed doing research and being in school and learning new things. But I felt really burnt out after undergrad. I was really broke and I had a bunch of student debt. So I felt like it wasn't smart to go to graduate school right away, mostly because I wasn't sure if I wanted to do archaeology or cultural anthropology. I also had some bad study habits and some time management habits that I did not want to take with me to a graduate program. So I decided that I wanted to take some time off and work. I also spoke to some of my mentors, so other graduate students who were in PhD programs at UVA, and some professors, and they all told me that they took time off before going into a graduate program, and they highly recommended it. So that kind of validated what I felt. I'm also a first generation graduate student, so nobody in my family before my generation has a master's degree or a PhD. Nobody in my whole family is an anthropologist or an archaeologist, so I was trying to figure things out on my own. And my family told me, oh, you're really smart, you're good at school, you should do a PhD. So I thought that that's what I should do. And then I realized that the only route that I could pursue was a PhD, but then I realized that if I wanted to get a PhD in anthropology, it could take 5 to 8 years. Sorry, Anna. And I was not ready for that commitment, like right as I was graduating from undergrad. So I took some time off, got some work experience. I worked for 2 years as an AmeriCorps member at a high school. I did some contract archaeology for a private company, and that experience really helped me realize that I wanted to pursue archaeology for a career, and it gave me a really good sense of what professional jobs there were outside of academia. So it became clear to me that a master's degree was more practical for my interests than pursuing a PhD. So I found it really beneficial to get some work experience so that I knew what skills that I needed to bring back with me, like GIS, preservation, law. So I knew what classes I wanted to take going into graduate school.
So I can, oh, are you done, Caitlin? Sorry.
I'm done, Anna.
Yeah, because I feel like it might be a good time for me to go and speak to a different experience that, but not to contradict any of your advice. I really agree with it, but I had a very different experience. And so I also do archaeology, but I'm in the anthropology PhD program in the archaeology track within it. And so I went straight from undergrad into a PhD program. And I completely agree with Caitlin that it's really important to know that you have something that you are interested in enough to do a specific type of degree, and to also have a goal that you're really passionate about that is at the end of that degree. So I really suggest checking in with yourself and doing some research and seeing like what is your specific goal that graduate school can help you with, like what kind of job do you want to have or interests you. Then, and if you have an idea of what that would be right now while you're thinking of applying to graduate school, I think that's a good sign that graduate school is a good decision for you right now, as opposed to if you're applying so that you can have post-grad plans to tell people, or if you want to take a little bit longer to figure out what interests you through a degree, I would caution that it can be a very stressful and sometimes expensive way to tread water for a couple of years. So yeah, if you have the opportunity to participate in research as an undergraduate, then that's a good way to, that was what I did to get a sense of, and that is what gave me the sense that there was something that I was really interested in, and that this sort of career that is doing archaeology in an academic setting was something that I was interested in doing as a career. And I have lots of friends who, like Caitlin, weren't sure that those decisions were right for them, and they took off time or did MAs and stuff like that. So I think it's important to be really sure about those decisions. And another thing that Caitlin also touched on is thinking about if you are financially ready to go to graduate school. It would be great to decide to go to graduate school based on believing in your dreams. And unfortunately funding is a really big deal. If you're not prepared to take on additional student debt or don't have savings that you can use, just make sure that you're researching what your funding options are for programs that interest you. And there are a lot of places that funding can come from, like working as a TA, getting fellowships, external grants that you can apply for. But if you do need to take time off and work beforehand, to make sure that you are financially secure enough to make that decision, then I would recommend that. So in my case, when I was applying to graduate school as a senior in college, I was applying to PhD programs in a large part because I knew that that was where it was more reliable to get funding. And I knew that that was, if I couldn't get funding, then I would need to take off a couple of years, regardless of the fact that I was very sure that I wanted to eventually go into a PhD program. But I was totally willing, if I got all rejections, to take some time and make sure that I wasn't going to put additional stress on myself in that way.
Perfect. So I guess we can move on to question 2 now. So how should undergraduate students prepare for applying to graduate school, and is research experience necessary?
I can tackle that, except literature is kind of a weird place to be talking about research experience. But anyway, in terms of what you should do to prepare for applying to graduate school, really echo the other two people. It's good to take a gap between undergrad and graduate school. And sometimes the longer the gap is, I think the easier your grad journey can be, because you've really spent the time to think about whether you want to be there. But I think generally, in addition to kind of, if you don't know whether you want to go to graduate school and you want to have, a good time in college and not stress yourself out, I wouldn't do that. But if you are interested in going to graduate school, I would say the best thing to do is talk to graduate students that you know, talk to your professors, talk to your departments. So especially in the humanities, and I can speak for my department specifically, especially if you're doing any kind of literature, the only reason that you would need a PhD is if you're going to teach in academia. You really don't need a PhD to do any other humanities-based job. It's not a required qualification. Sometimes you might need an MA, but that's about it. So if you're doing a PhD in a field like literature, and do it because you want to work in universities or higher ed. And if you want to do that, then find out as an undergraduate what that looks like in your institutions, or in institutions like yours, or institutions unlike yours. PhDs will go on to teach in a whole different slew of institutions, right? Like Cornell is one very specific R1 Ivy League type of institution, but you can teach in small private liberal arts colleges. You can teach in community colleges. You can teach in large state schools. You could work in research research fields or other spaces that are kind of consortia-like. And so my biggest thing is not to worry too much about what needs to go into your application, but really talking to these people and reaching out to them. And most people are happy to talk to you. Like, we like to talk about our work a lot. Talk to them about what a day in the life is like. Talk to them about their workplace. Talk to them about the expectations that they have, and ask them what they've done. Like, collecting this information from as many people as you can who have gone through this experience is probably going to prepare you for graduate school much better than trying to get app materials ready. I also think that it is going to help you get your app materials ready, in that it will give you a really good, compelling reason to put down in that personal statement for when you say that you're going to want to go to graduate school. In terms of research experience, it can be beneficial. And I think it can be beneficial in that, at the very least, if you do research, so if you're doing something like literature, you might want to be a research assistant for a professor researching, a chapter of a book, or you might want to go to undergrad conferences, or you might want to go and ask somebody if they want an RA for a semester, or look up for RA posts that you can do. That can be helpful because, again, it gives you a taste of the work. If you really don't like doing this RA work, then maybe, grad school isn't what you want to do. You want to do something else. But it can also be useful because this person will write you a recommendation. But in my experience, I did not have that particular type of research experience before getting into graduate school. And so it's really, really not necessary in my field, although it can be for others.
I'm just going to backtrack a little bit to the first question to answer the second question. So I wasn't entirely certain which field I wanted to apply to for last fall. I was interested in political science government programs, anthropology programs, and Asian studies interdisciplinary MA programs. The first two were PhD programs, but I eventually settled on Cornell because I had a lot of meetings with faculty and students in both PhD and MA fields. And I came up with at least 5 questions about the program and the student experience. And these are questions that are not already addressed on the website about the program. Depending on what you learn, I asked about employment opportunities, mostly to the department staff, because usually they know those kinds of opportunities best than faculty. At the same time, I actually got accepted into a PhD program in political science because I went to a faculty and she told me, you're the only person who went to me in person before even submitting the application and asking me these questions. And she was willing to be my advisor. And I felt a little bit bad that I chose the MA program in Cornell. But the reason I knew I wanted to be at Cornell for my MA program was because I had had all these conversations and I knew where my interests lied. And I honestly still couldn't decide between the fields of anthropology and political science. And I also wanted to pivot towards the South Asia region in terms of my academic research, because I had, as you can imagine, with my first stint in grad school, I spent so much time focused on mainland China, both in my undergraduate years at University of Buffalo and in the Hopkins Nanjing Center. And then after that, for 3 years immediately prior to this year, I was in New Haven working for a little known nonprofit called the Yale China Association. So all of these things helped me prepare for the program I'm in today. And at the same time, I kept in touch with recommenders from my undergraduate program and my first graduate program at the Hopkins Nanjing Center. And even if these people don't know or they haven't kept in touch with you enough to know what you've been up to, if they still remember you from a class at least 5 to 8 years ago, and you're willing to at least write a 1-page update on what you've been doing, most of them are more than happy to write a recommendation for you. So these are great ways to prepare to apply, along with doing a lot to be prepared for the reading and also having frank discussions about what to expect. And so I think doing all these acts of preparation actually benefited me most, because when I got all these decisions back, it was a little question that I wanted to pursue an MA in Asian Studies before pursuing a PhD in either Cornell or somewhere else.
So I'm gonna speak for just the government department, because I don't know how applying to the other programs are like. So firstly, I don't think you will ever truly know if grad school is right for you until you're actually in it. It's very different from undergrad. No matter how much like studying and research people talk about, is different. So I also went straight to a PhD program from undergrad. But I do agree with what the other panelists said, that sometimes you might want to take a couple of years off to figure out what you really want to do. And I think it also actually helps for your application after you take like a couple of years off and figure out what are the research topics that you're actually interested in. It does help you craft a stronger application. I think also for government, because of the kind of courses you take, the fields are so broad. When you want to apply, you have to decide if you want to major in IR or comparative politics or American politics. And it's sometimes hard for an undergrad to narrow your research to one research question that you really want to do to apply. So taking a couple of years off to do something else might really help you decide what are the exact questions that you're interested in. I think someone mentioned that I think it's critical. You should think about whether you want to do a PhD or master's, because a lot of career tracks, you don't actually need to do a PhD to do that. So for the government, for political science or government, I would say you would need a PhD to work in a think tank and to work in academia and some sort of like high level data analytics kind of thing. But other than that, sometimes a master's suffice. There also aren't a lot of poli-sci master's degrees. So maybe that says something about why you need a master's in political science in the first place. So think about that. But if you're sure that academia is what you're interested in, or you're okay with working in the policy world, but not in academia, you could also do a PhD. Because you have to think about like the realities of the job market is that it's so bad that we cannot guarantee that you will get a job in academia, even if you graduate with a PhD degree from like a top university in government. So think about that. But if you think you're happy with, spending your 20s in doing research that you like with a community of like-minded people, with somewhat stable income for 5 to 6 years, living in a small college town, maybe, if that's what you think you like, and your end goal, like research is not a PhD program, is an end in itself and not just a means to an end, grad school might be right for you. In terms of preparing for grad school for political science, I think having research experience does definitely help as well in terms of deciding the kind of research questions they're interested in, helping you craft an application, things like that. It demonstrates that you're capable of conducting independent research, which is something that graduate admissions programs look for. You might also want to develop a skill set that consists of both quantitative and qualitative skills, and demonstrate that you know some sort of like basic statistical quantitative reasoning kind of skills for political science programs. That's something that political science look out for. The rest, think about, letters of recommendation, build up relationships with your professors, take graduate classes if you can, but that's not a definite. It does just help to signal that you know what you're getting into, firstly, secondly, that you have the capabilities to take graduate classes and think and do research in a way that is at that level. Yeah, that's all I have for government.
Perfect. So we're gonna move into the mini Q&A round now and so feel free to type any questions you have into the Q&A function.
I think there was one for Caitlin.
Oh. I think it got answered, but
Yes, I just finished typing my answer. If you'd like me to explain it, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
The gist. So the question was basically, how did I ensure that I stayed motivated to go back to school after taking time off? And I just said that I was worried about the same thing because I worked in college access, and studies have shown that high school students who delay going to college after high school are less likely to go at all. So I just assumed that it was the same for graduate school, even though I'm not aware of any studies about that. So I guess it wasn't a good thing for me to assume necessarily. But once I got into the field and started doing archaeology, it was very easy for me to stay motivated just because I couldn't advance. I couldn't get the skills that I needed to advance, and I also could only do certain projects, or I couldn't author my own reports because for archaeologists you have to meet this thing called the Secretary of the Interior Standards, which means you have to have a master's degree or PhD. You can't make a whole lot of money if you don't have a graduate degree, so it was just like, it's either I go to graduate school or I don't make enough money to live. So it was pretty easy for me to stay motivated that way. And also a lot of my friends were going back for archaeology programs for graduate school. So I watched them apply, and they helped me a lot.
Okay, great. So we have another question for the people in the government department. So they were asking, did any of you complete independent research as undergraduates or mostly just serve as research assistants?
So I did both research assistant work and independent research when I was an undergrad. For independent research, mainly through my senior honors thesis. And I think that's a really great way for undergrads to get a taste of what independent research could be like. So I did that. I thought it was useful, but I think its impact in terms of application and helping me in grad school is limited. And I did write about that as the kind of research topic that I'll be interested in doing in grad school, but I did not end up working on that. And I think most people end up, at least for the government department, you end up going to the program, taking like a couple years of coursework and then working on something that might be completely different from what you thought you would work on. I don't think you need to do independent research to demonstrate your ability to conduct research. I don't think that's the only way. I think having research assistant experiences is also good enough, as long as you could demonstrate that you did like a substantial, you had like a substantial contribution towards the project. It wasn't just like mindless coding or something. Yeah, does that answer your question? What do you want to know? What do you guys want to know about independent research itself?
Yeah, I think you gave a really good answer, and I think they were just asking about like if those things were maybe beneficial for their application, and I think you answered that really well. We had another question for Kritika. They were asking if they were able to get into a top program, what are the realistic chances that they could get a tenure track job afterwards? And what other options are there for teaching afterwards beyond community colleges or high schools?
Hi, Malcolm. Thanks for asking that. I don't have a good answer for you. The answer is bleak. The answer is that higher education is imploding, and it's imploding everywhere. It's imploding particularly here in North America, but also in the UK and Australia and New Zealand, which are usually the markets that people look for when they're looking for jobs. This is not the case if you're looking at South Asia, Southeast Asia. So if that's a thing, talk to me later. And I think that's not a bad thing. But right now, especially because of COVID and department cuts and just general generational defunding of humanities programs and devaluation of humanities research, there aren't that many tenure track jobs. And the problem is not just that there aren't that many tenure track jobs, is that adjunctification is increasing, which means that universities now find it more cost efficient to hire what is from a surplus pool of PhD holders to teach one class a term for something like $3,000 to $4,000. And you do that without benefits, and you do that without job security, and you do that term for term. And there's plenty of people, especially now, who take on that work because there's nothing really left to do. So higher ed is in a crisis. Quite frankly, I do not think that can be solved unless faculty unionize along with other contingent members and graduate students. So if you're going to do this after a couple of years, hopefully we get our stuff together and have a system that is slightly less broken for you to go to. That's the very candid story about tenure track jobs, and it is quite dismal. It is less dismal, like I said, abroad, so that might be something to look into. And university jobs and teaching abroad are great. There's really good research endowments in some places. I've been seeing positions crop up in Germany. I've seen positions crop up in mainland China. So if you're happy to move or you're willing to move, then that's definitely an option. In terms of other places, community colleges are kind of great if you're into that kind of teaching. I know a lot of people who go through PhD programs and preferentially go to community colleges because the kind of research and teaching and service that you have to do to remain competitive at an R1 institution can burn you out. Especially if you're an underrepresented student. So that's community colleges are a great place to go. And so community colleges have jobs. Another place that will hire PhDs in English right now, well, I guess, you know, we have that problem where there's a lot of PhDs in the humanities and no jobs. So lots of people will hire PhDs in humanities right now because there's so many of us. But high schools, private high schools are another good place to look. They also have research budgets. They also have, you know, lots of independent ability to teach design courses. Another place to look is libraries, museums, and cultural heritage centers. And lots of PhDs with English also go on to do like communications work in large nonprofits or other places. But when anything apart from community college, including high school communications work, and sometimes museum or library work, although those can need PhDs, none of these things need PhDs. You could do these after a master's program. So really just, you know, if you're doing a PhD in literature, I still think it's worth it to do it if you want to spend 5 years precariously funded, but funded nevertheless. Doing research that you would not get to do otherwise, that's still a good idea. But yeah, the tenure track market is bleak, but you know, the other thing universities are doing right now is finally realizing that this is a crisis and trying to find tracks for PhD students in the humanities to work elsewhere. So there is an increase in funding for public humanities programs, stuff like, you know, pushing people with humanities degrees to work in radio, in media and communication, that kind of thing. And if you're doing this in a couple of years, again, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that those pathways are more established and available to you. But yeah, this is the not so fun job news.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for all the questions and all the great answers. We're going to be moving on to round 2 now.
So hi everyone, I'm Samantha and I'm a member of the outreach committee with CURB. So this round is going to focus more on the application process for grad school. So just a reminder to the attendees, if you have any questions specific to this round, just type them in the Q&A function. So we can just start with the first question. So when should I apply to graduate school and do you recommend taking a gap year? And any of the panelists, just feel free to jump in.
I guess I can start here. I think that the first thing kind of obviously is to know all of your application deadlines. Each school is going to be a little bit different, even though they will typically fall in the last two months or so of the year. There are some factors when you're applying that are completely outside of your control, such as the submission of official transcripts and letters of recommendation. You ask for these things and you start the process, but getting those documents to the application, to the portal, is a little bit beyond your control. So it's really important to leave enough room before the actual deadline in case you need to address an unforeseen, complication or clerical error. With that said, I don't think that there's any reason to believe that an early application that's submitted well before the deadline has a greater chance of admission, or even that the committee reading those applications would be made aware of the date or time that the application was submitted. A little bit about maybe the master's before a PhD. I did complete a terminal MA in a field very similar to my field, as a way both to kind of explore options and see if a PhD was something that I wanted to do. But it was also a really great way to make my applications for PhDs programs much more competitive. Especially if you can find a funded master's program, which I was lucky enough to find that. Those come with TA-ships. In addition to the experience of conducting research, you will also get very valuable teaching experience, which, for committees looking for TAs in their PhD program is definitely gives you a leg up.
I don't know if standardized tests are still a thing now with COVID, but I'm going to assume that they are and just say that that should be one of the first things that you do to get it out of the way if it is a requirement for your program, because you might need to take it again if you don't like your score. So for me, I was applying my earliest application deadline was December 1st. So I took the GRE in June. So I would have enough time to retake it if I didn't like my score. I didn't like my score, but then I decided that I just didn't want to retake it because I was fed up with it. But speaking of the GRE, I meant to say this earlier. If you are a recipient of a Pell Grant here at Cornell, you're eligible for a fee waiver that covers part or all of the costs of the GRE. So if that applies to you and you're thinking, I want to apply to graduate school sometime in the future, maybe not right now, I encourage you to look into that with the financial aid office, because the GRE score, and I don't know about other standardized tests for like law school or anything else with MCAT or anything, but I know for the GRE is good for 5 years. So if you take it your junior or senior year, you still have some time where that score is good. So I encourage you, if you are eligible for a Pell Grant, to take the GRE as when you're still an undergrad.
We probably have time for one more panelist to tackle this question if anyone wants to jump in.
I mean, just adding to what Caitlin said, it's also worth emailing the programs you're applying to and asking them if they want the GRE, because it's there on paper, but sometimes they're like, oh, actually, we really dislike standardized testing. So check with your institution whether you have, there's some way for you to take it and get funded, but also for every program you're applying to, just email them and ask how important it is that you take these tests, and tell them that, it's all, amongst other things, it's a financial burden. I'm an international student. I took the GRE from India, and the conversion was not pretty in terms of how much money I had to spend, right? So email the departments that you're applying to.
Awesome. I think we can move on to the next question then. So our next question is, what is the application process like? And do you have any advice on how to prepare or important things to keep in mind going into this process?
I can start with that one. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Great. Okay. So I'll make this quick since we're both for the government department. So the two advice that I got when I was applying for grad school from my advisors were, firstly, to only apply for programs where they can guarantee you funding, because it is difficult to live as a grad student, even with funding, without funding, especially if you're in an expensive city, New York City, LA, you're not going to be able to get 5 to 6 more years of student debt and not have a guaranteed job at the end of it. It's not worth it. So go for programs with funding. Secondly, check their placement records. So reputable schools, they will have a placement record just right on their website. Check that. Check where their students are placing. Depending on where you want to go into after you graduate, look at where they're placing their students. If this is where you're happy going to, go. And also generally just make sure that they're placing people, because the job market, as Kritika mentioned, is not so good. It's a bit better in other humanities and social sciences, but it's not great. So check that out. I would also say to apply to places where you have at least 2 faculty members who are working on the kind of things that you want to work on. So you will be mainly having one advisor for political science. I'm not sure about others, but you want to make sure that it isn't just one faculty member that you want to work with, because you cannot guarantee that they're going to be there for all 5 to 6 years that you're there. They might leave halfway, but you're stuck at the program. So do that. Having more faculty members also that who you're interested in working with also allows you to expand the kind of like expand the range of the kind of. Also, again, because applying is not cheap, you have to pay application fees for every school that you apply to, just like undergrad. Try to only apply to places where you're a good fit with the department. So everything in terms of the kind of region that you want to work on for political science, to the specific topics that you want to work on. Maybe you might want to look at the culture of the department, because that does matter, I want to say, to a certain extent. So make sure you're a good fit with the department. Also, methodologically for political science, some departments are more quantitative than others. So like if you want to work on formal theory, Rochester is the place to go. If you want to work on political economy, MIT is the place to go. If you're a bit more mixed methods, Cornell is the place to go. So find out what the different reputations for the departments are. Make sure that this is a good fit for you before you apply. When you're writing the application essay, you will kind of know if this is a good fit for you. If you find that you don't have good reasons for why you want to go to study, you can't find like 2 to 3 professors that you really want to work with when you're writing the application essay, maybe don't apply there. Yeah, so I would say these are the important things to look out for political science. Chris, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add on.
I'll just add this. So when you're thinking about grad school, there's definitely a difference between a master's program and a PhD program. So put yourself in the position of the professors, depending upon which type you're going to. So for me, I've got 3 master's degrees. I'm working on my PhD right now. A master's degree, when a professor looks at you, they're looking to train you so that you're going to go somewhere else outside of academia for the most part. You're going to work at a think tank, you're going to be a senator's aide, you're going to work for the United Nations, something along those lines, but you're going to go out into the field. And so your essay and your study should be along those lines. If you're applying for a PhD program, though, they're looking for someone who's going to be a potential peer for them. You're going to assist them in writing papers that they're trying to get published, and then things that they're also going to work with you on later on to advance your career, and then be an equal to them. So when you're thinking about the differentiation between a master's degree program and a PhD program, think in those lines. You really want to find for a PhD program someone who's going to be an advisor that will advocate for you and you make a personal connection with in the application process. You want to have some pretty decent overlap with that individual and some connections, because they're going to be in control of your life for the next roughly 5 years of your life and have a lot of sway over how successful you are in the PhD program. If you're just going for a master's degree program, that's far less important. They just want to make sure that you're a really good student and that you'll contribute to the field writ large when you go out into the discipline outside of academia. So basically, an undergraduate degree is about learning about the field. A master's degree is about going out into the field, and in academia, you are leading the field as far as the thinking and the theorizing, the statistical quantification of things. So if that helps you look at how professors look at your application, it'll help you kind of quantify how you want to write and how you want to apply your time as far as finding somebody to be your advocate or just showing that you're a really good student.
Those were both great answers. Would anybody outside of the government department like to chime in before we move on?
I can add a few things. I definitely, echo the sentiments that you should apply to departments that are right for you. And that while, the thought that tailoring an application or letter, personal statement to the department might make you more likely to be accepted, that doesn't mean that the department will be a good fit for you. If they wouldn't accept you for your research interests, it's probably a waste of time. But beyond that, in addition to being expensive, I think I spent around $1,000 applying to graduate school. I applied to many programs. But it's also very time consuming and frustrating at times. So you need to be prepared for that. Being, highly organized is going to really help you. Having multiple, folder for applications on your computer with individual folders for each school, checklists. Since most applicants are typically applying to multiple programs, there's a lot of moving parts around. And so this organization is really going to help. Some documents there are some documents that most, if not all, programs are going to ask you for, like your CV or your writing sample. And once you create one, you essentially can submit the same document to multiple programs. But there are other items like your personal statements or letters of application that there is a certain amount of customization required. And you really need to be as specific as possible to that department. Name a professor, or 3 would be better, I think, as Chris said. But you need to be specific who you want to work with and show the department how you fit into what they already have established, and what you can bring to, elevate the department, what new ideas you might have.
Great, thank you all so much for your responses. So I think we're going to move into our brief Q&A round for this session. So I think the first question, we had a question for Anna that she answered in the chat, but if you wanted to elaborate a little more on that live, the question is, for those of you who went straight from undergrad to grad school, how did you balance your last year of college and applying and networking for grad school at the same time?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm just pulling up the Q&A to make sure that I that I touch on those points a little bit again. Yeah, I think that that's a really important thing to think about, like what kind of time am I able to contribute to this application? I definitely have friends who knew that they were too busy and they had too many courses that they were taking as seniors in college, who so it would not be beneficial for their grades, their mental health, their applications to do that as a senior in college. For me, it was made possible by the fact that so I didn't double major. I had one major and one minor, and I started on both of those pretty early. I'm not saying this was perfect planning on my part as an 18-year-old. It's just kind of how it worked out. That a lot of my coursework, it turned out by my senior year, I didn't end up adding a major. So I had a little bit of time to pretty much just focus on a couple of courses and my thesis when I was a senior. So it really opened up my schedule to where I was able to work on research, which was something that was important to my application in archaeology. I think especially for an archaeology PhD program, you have to have research if you're going to apply for a PhD program. So I was able to focus on that, my thesis, and applications. And as I also said in this in the Q&A response, I also had my recommenders pretty much locked down by the time I was a senior. Again, not something that I orchestrated on purpose from the early years of my college, but it ended up that I got lucky early on, and I found mentors who were really helpful for me. And of course, I stayed in my major, and so it kind of worked out that a lot of this stuff was already in place. So I wasn't having to try and meet new professors, and I wasn't having to cram in a bunch of critical coursework or the bulk of my research all in my senior year. So it was a time that I was able to, I joked at the time that it was my gap year to work on applications.
Awesome. So another question we received is, how similar is the application to grad school similar to an application to an undergraduate program? So are there any parallels between a grad school application and just a regular college application?
I can answer that. The only thing that's most similar is the letter of recommendation. And you don't write those yourself, obviously. But the personal statement is like the most important, at least for, when I was applying. I don't know about other fields of study, but the personal statement compared to a college essay is very, very, very different from what your personal statement is. Your personal statement is more of like a research proposal, and your college essay, some of the essays that I saw and that I remember applying have crazy topics that are very colloquial and not formal research proposals. So that's very different. You're going to spend a lot of time working on your personal statement, and it's good to get several people to read it, including perhaps your undergraduate advisor, maybe another classmate. And yeah, that's the main thing from my perspective.
I want to second what Caitlin said. Is totally different from undergrad application. I applied straight from my undergrad as a senior to a PhD program, and at that point, I don't think I have ever written a research proposal before. So I had a lot of trouble trying to craft my personal statement, and what really helped me was getting a grad student to help me. So try to reach out to your TAs or grad students. Sometimes they've served on admissions committees before, so they know exactly what the department is looking for. Or if not, we would have seen applications from different cohorts before, so we know what's supposed to go onto a good application essay, and grad students can really help you with that. So try to reach out to them. And also that's another reason why you should plan ahead if you want to apply to a PhD program, because you want to have time to workshop your personal essay, you want to have time to give it to people, wait for their feedback, and then workshop it again. So start early, maybe at the beginning of your fall semester, a little bit after that, I want to say. Yeah, so for political science PhD programs, it's usually due December 15th, mid-December, I want to say. And UC schools, UC Berkeley, UCLA, the applications are due a lot earlier. So that's similar to undergrad, I guess, because they're always due earlier. So prep early, send it to grad students, send it to your peers, send it to your advisors, as Caitlin said.
Great. And then we just have one final question for this round that was answered in the chat. We can talk about a little bit as well. And it is, what is the most important aspect of an application for a PhD program in fields like philosophy or literature?
I think I'll just say what I typed, which is the two most important things that you produce are your personal statement, which is a weird thing to say it's a personal statement because it's really a research statement. And your writing sample for literature, especially, because that's going to be the main output for philosophy and literature. It's what you write, which, you know, depending on whether you, that's how you want your work to be measured. So those are the two things that I would get started on. I think, Neo, you're very right. Get started on it early in the beginning of fall. Send it to multiple people. Send your research, your personal statement, and your whatever you decide your writing sample needs to be to your recommender. Send it to other people who are willing to read for you. Send it to, actually also send it to, you know, a bunch of different types of people. It's really helpful to get feedback from a professor and a graduate student. It's also helpful to get feedback from a friend or a professional in another field, because they will all give you feedback that works at different parts of a letter. You know, someone is going to tell you about how this reads to a general audience, or there's going to give you information about content or flow. And a more sort of expert opinion is going to tell you how to like tweak very specific details, or whether like this specific theoretical framework is going to be more, you know, useful than the one that you use, so on and so forth. So do this early, as early as possible. And if you don't, that's okay. Trust yourself and just kind of work on it. And these are the two things that I would work on the most. The other thing to do is to make these two things kind of talk to each other. So in your research statement, if you're saying something like, for literature and philosophy, right? Like, I really enjoy, I mean, I work on post-structuralist methods for whatever reason, and I'm interested in environmental humanities, or I'm interested in queer theory, whatever it is you're talking about. Make sure that you're engaging with those things in your writing statement. Sorry, in your writing sample. So the more these documents talk to each other, and the more these documents act as evidence for the other one, the easier it is for an admissions committee reading it to kind of get ahead of your application. The part that's important that you don't have that much control over, unfortunately, is your letter of rec. And here, again, make sure that you find good letter writers. It's really strange. Sometimes the most prominent person in your field who could write you a letter will not write you a very good letter. And so, you know, the best letter writers are the professors who will write specific details about your research and your writing in the letter, and mention specific things. They'll say, like, when I was in class with this person, when this person won this award, when this person did this thing, when this person brought this question up. And if you want samples for that, I'm happy, email me, I have some. But, you know, talk to your rec letter writers, ask them, you know, kind of discuss this with them, send them your work. The more you send them your work, the better the letter of rec is going to be. So negotiate that. And, you know, make sure that you're asking people who support you and want you to go to graduate school. If someone seems like they don't want to write you a rec letter, don't run after them, because that letter might not be good. In a perfect world, this would not happen, but I have seen people write bad letters of rec. Don't, like, you know, so just find people who really support you and do that.
Great, thank you guys so much for those answers. And I think now we can move on to round 3.
Hello, everyone. My name's Kaylin. I'm a sophomore studying human biology, health and society in the College of Human Ecology. and I've been on the outreach committee for 2 years now. And let's get started with the final round. So round 3 is going to be about life in graduate school. So after you get into grad school, what is life's going to be looking like for graduate students? So question 1, what does a typical week look like for a graduate student? And any panelist can jump in and answer at any time.
So I have a bit of a unique experience because I'm working in currently 4 classes across different disciplines: government, law, economics, and also in just language learning with the Nepali language. So at least with the language courses, it's pretty straightforward to how undergraduate courses are structured. But with the law course, I'm learning how to engage with people who are in the law school. Despite not being a JD student myself, I had to get special permission for this course. So it's a lot of reading, a lot of preparation of understanding legal terminology. Even right next to me, there's dictionaries of legal terms. I also have different, I also just do quite a bit of different readings for my authoritarianism class in the government department, which is a lot more fascinating than it leads on. And then also with the law and economics course, there's a bit of reading. But for the most part, if you just take 3 or 4 classes for, well, at least for a master's program, I can't speak for the PhD program, then you should still have free time to pursue other extracurricular activities, at least until you have to get up to writing your thesis and applying to other programs. But for my current situation, I even have time to work with a team at the Cornell Law School, because in my previous stint of grad school, I participated in a legal competition known as a moot court. And I really loved my experience. And now I'm advising JD students at the Cornell Law School. So if anyone else has some questions about how to engage with students at the law school, or taking classes in the law school or other disciplines without being a student in that school or department, then definitely let me know. You know, at the same time, I feel like I've had a pretty good balance between work and life, despite everything going on in terms of the election, COVID-19 and stuff like that. And so long as you just take 3 or 4 classes per semester as an MA student in the humanities or social sciences, you should be on pretty solid footing for having a good work-life balance through at the MA program. Again, until you have to work on finding jobs, writing a thesis, or applying to PhD programs or other kinds of programs.
I think I'm gonna do the PhD part, and I don't mean, okay, so if you're a PhD student, I can tell you what my week looked like last time. And this is also something about when you're looking for programs, like some programs have you teach a lot, mine does, that's how I get funded. And some programs don't have teaching at all. But in a program with teaching and 5 years of like pretty decent funding, even though I complain about it, it's decent funding, this is what a week looked like last week, right? So I teach 3 times a week. I teach a course independently. It's called the First Year Writing Seminar. So I come up with the syllabus on my own. I don't have supervision. I have to deal with my department in terms of getting, I have a course leader, but it's independently done. So I teach 3 times a week. I grade papers. I meet with my students. Sometimes I have conferences with 17 students. So that's basic. Sometimes I do 14-hour days, twice or thrice a week, just to get a hold on my teaching responsibilities. So teaching. Then I do professional development, because at a point when you're done with your things and you're writing a dissertation, which is what I'm doing, you need to start looking for jobs. And in case there are no jobs available, you need to start looking for plans B through Z of what you can do with this degree. And oftentimes when there's no paths available for you, you're kind of having to do that kind of research on your own. And so this involves going to webinars, it involves doing informational interviews. It involves sometimes applying to different types of funded opportunities like a public humanities grant, or, you know, finding an internship somewhere, doing something cool. So it's fun, but, you know, there's intentionality there. The third thing that you do if you're in a PhD program is service. You're in a department, and if you've been in a department for a long enough time, you're probably involved in how it's running, whether that's doing service work for admissions, or it's, in my case, like our department, like hopefully every other department everywhere in the United States is having conversations about instituting anti-racist pedagogies. We used to be the Department of English, now we're the Department of Literatures and English, and we're trying to like do more than that. And sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time students are involved. That can take time, and that can take work, and that can take effort. And it's not work that you can really opt out of because it affects your workplace, right? So you kind of have to be involved. And then you do research, which in my case is archival work. I do this in the summers, I do this in spring. I have to get funding to do this because for me, this means I have to go to the UK. Archival work is great because those are the weeks when I actually get to work from 8 to 5, because that's when archives close. They don't let you live there. You get kicked out. When I'm not doing archival work, I will live at my desk doing research. This is really sad. So that's research. And then the fifth thing that you do is writing. At some point, you have to coalesce all of this stuff that you're doing and put that into, you know, writing. And you're writing for different genres. You're writing a dissertation, you're writing articles for publication, you're writing conference papers that you're giving, you're writing lectures that people are inviting you to, hopefully. Someone should be doing that. And if someone isn't, you should do it for them. You'll be writing all these different types of things and kind of putting your work out there. So it's not just studying, and I'm taking coursework too, by the way. I don't know why. We're usually done with coursework by the time you get to your 5th year. But here I am taking coursework because sometimes you get to this point and you realize that I really needed to have taken this one course to get a really good methodological. Some weeks can be 90 hours and some weeks can be 40 hours. It's important to keep a work-life balance. And it's also important to know that in a PhD program, you know, it's a job. And the more you treat it like a job and the more you treat it like, you know, having specific times that you clock on and clock off, I think the healthier everyone will be. But there's lots of different types of things to do. And it will change if you have, you know, more field work, if you have more research, if you work in a lab. Those are different rhythms, but this is kind of what it looks like in the
Would any other panelists like to go?
Yeah, I can say a few things.
Perfect. Thank you, Samantha.
Yeah, I think maybe first of all is that, you know, it really does, it's vastly different when you're starting your PhD program versus ending your PhD program. So during your first, you know, 2 to 3 years of coursework, you're likely taking as many as 5 graduate seminars and usually not less than 3, in addition to things like modern languages or, you know, classes that interest you but don't actually fill required credits. You know, a few words about maybe seminars, at least in, you know, humanities seminars, is that there will be a lot of work, typically 100 pages of critical reading a week, I would say is fairly standard. And, you know, critical reading for me anyway, requires taking notes and annotating the reading material, not just reading it. So you might think, you know, a 30-page article will take me half an hour, but if you're actually critically reading that, it might take 2 or 3 times that. Lectures in graduate classes are not very common. Graduate students instead are really expected to not only participate, but often lead discussions. You know, readings always really need to be analyzed and when appropriate, critiqued. You know, more than once I have been assigned a chapter or an article in a seminar for the sole reason that the professor disagreed with something about its methodology or its conclusions. And so the point of the assignment was really to disagree, not just parrot back the main thesis or the, evidence for their thesis. And so if you're in a funded program, you will likely have to TA, and this can mean a couple different things. You can TA as an actual teaching assistant for a professor, which includes things like grading exams or papers, as well as participating and encouraging in-class discussion and being available during office hours. Sometimes you might be asked to teach a session as a professor's teaching assistant, which would require, an additional, usually 50-minute meeting outside of their lecture. You're expected to obviously attend all of their lectures. It's, as people have said, it's common and usual that you'll be TAing 1, maybe 2 courses a semester, while you're also taking classes. In addition to that, you'll be preparing for your exams. You'll have qualifying exams, usually at the end of your second year, which test skills that are deemed essential in your field for a PhD holder to have. In classics, those are our language exams in Latin and Greek to test, basic mastery of those skills. And in addition to teaching and taking classes and preparing for those exams, forming your special committee, your special committee that's your second round of exams that are more particular to your research. You're also expected to participate in various departmental functions and events. And these things, it includes things like guest lectures, which you might expect, but also asking questions and really engaging with the lecture and the speaker itself. It's usually, in my department, it's very much expected that graduate students not only attend the lectures, but the receptions afterwards, where there's, light food and drink, and you're expected to socialize, with these people. In addition to those kind of formal events, your department might also often ask you to take visiting professors out to lunch or dinner, which the department will pay for. And so they'll pay for the dinner, but they don't pay you, for your time. So there are a lot of kind of social aspects to getting a PhD and being a part of a department.
Thank you so much for the insightful answers, guys. All right, question 2. What is something you wish you knew before attending graduate school? Again, anyone can jump in at any time.
Certainly the first thing I wish I knew was having more frank conversations with family and significant others, people who you already dedicate a lot of time to. And I can speak to it personally because, I've managed long distance relationships for many years. I work with my mother who's quadriplegic, and sometimes I have to balance between my studies here at Cornell and working with her. And, sometimes, especially during my first stint of graduate school, when I went abroad to China, I wish I had more serious conversations with people about alternatives that would leave me closer to home. And, sometimes you might be all set and they'll say, oh, go wherever you want. You can stay in the States or go to the other side of the world. But I think even in terms of focusing on yourself, you also have to focus on those who are important to you, because after you are in the midst of the program, you might start regretting not having paid more attention to them. And it can be a source of immense stress if that happens. Now, thankfully, I've been able to weather through all those kinds of problems, but at the same time, I can't stress enough how important it is to have those conversations, and also maybe think about a more flexible program like an MA program that leaves you with a little bit more leeway, especially in a time as uncertain like this, when not only is the pandemic causing havoc with employment opportunities, but immigration is in flux for many people here in the US, and that can be difficult when you're navigating between different relationships across different nationalities and things like that. So these are a lot of things to be concerned about. And sometimes you just have to be frank or thinking about other people besides your current opportunity in front of you.
I would say you don't need to be the smartest person in the room immediately. I think there's a lot of pressure when you get to graduate school and you start taking seminars. And at least for me, there were a lot of people around me who already had master's degrees. I didn't. And we would get to class and everyone would be trying to posture about how much they knew. And it puts a lot of pressure on you to feel like, well, why don't I know as much as I think the people around me know? But the thing you have to remember is that you're in graduate school for a reason. If you already knew everything, then you should have the degree already. Everyone is there because they still have something that they need to learn. And also, if you are taking the track of going into academia, ideally people are learning their entire lives about these topics, and you're just there to take in as much as you can. And it is okay. And I think more people should openly say, hey, I don't understand this, because if you pretend that you already know something, then you're actually going to end up shortchanging yourself on your education. You should, if you don't understand something, say directly to your professor, can you explain this to me? Because you're in a program for a reason, and you should get as much as you possibly can out of it without worrying about how you might appear to the people around you. I guess in the sense of not looking smart enough, of course, you should be courteous and a good colleague to your classmates.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think kindness takes you a long, long way. And it's probably one of the more important things that really help with graduate education, not necessarily smartness, however you would want to quantify that. It's a really weird term, isn't it? I will say the other thing that is important that I wish I knew is that graduates work or don't work in graduate school. And so it's just, I wish I'd known that if I really needed to work on my project and my main chair was in a different field, that's okay for the most part. Which brings me to point two. Lots of things in graduate programs are more negotiable than you think. I don't know how many people have heard the word hidden curriculum. I feel like it's more present in STEM than in the humanities. But it is a real thing. And it's a thing where, and I think the most important thing to understand is that really, really more things are negotiable than you think. And so ask and ask repeatedly. Get to know your admin people in the office. They are kind, they are generous. They usually want to advocate for you, and they're usually likely to be your best allies when you run into issues. But negotiate everything. If you need to push exam dates, if you're not quite sure of what classes you need to take, if there's some requirement that doesn't make sense to you or you don't understand, if people around you seem to be applying to fellowships and no one's told you to apply to them yet and you don't know what's going on, ask someone, ask your advisor, ask the admin, ask your peers, ask someone who's ahead in your program. If you're not from a place where someone in your family or close to you has gone to graduate school, if you're a first-gen student, if you are minoritized in other ways, a graduate department can have a lot of norms that are not really made explicit. And you'll be doing yourself and other people a favor the more you ask and the more you make these things explicit, for yourself and others. And the last thing I'll say is life happens in graduate school. People get married, people have babies, people move houses, people experience bereavement and death. And I think we've had more than our fair share of it this year. I'm one of the people who can't leave the country right now because immigration, it's great. And so sometimes you're stuck in places and sometimes you're not. It's different from college because I think in college, life is not happening to you in the same degree. That's a gross generalization. For a lot of people, it is. But especially in graduate school, when you're in your mid-20s or your early 30s or whenever you're doing it, it's a job, and things that happen in real life are going to happen to you. And so it's really important to sort of know that and be prepared for that. And, hopefully not put things off till you've graduated, because that might take 7 years. That might take 5 years. Who knows? That might never happen. So, make a plan so you can continue to live your life the way that you need to while you're in graduate school. Do the things you want to do.
Something kind of quick that I would add is, and maybe to kind of change the question, it was something I wish I knew before I even knew I wanted to go to grad school, were modern language requirements. I'm in a program that it has languages as a part of it, ancient Latin and Greek, but I wasn't quite aware at how extensive the modern language requirements would be. Many programs require German in addition to some combination of Spanish, Italian, and French, or others, depending on the languages that scholarship is produced. Obviously, it's produced in all languages, but depending on your field, subfield, and even, we get very niche-y in grad school, we get very specific, and sometimes there's only a handful of scholars, and maybe 80% of them are in Germany or Italy. So I wish I had studied French more when I was an undergrad and had a better grasp of it, because I had to spend quite a lot of time in graduate school really honing those modern languages.
Perfect. Thank you so much all for sharing. Really insightful. We have a couple of questions from the Q&A session. The first one, and I see that Daniel wants to answer this first. It says, how did you evaluate your fit with the program you're in now? So the graduate program you're in now, how did you evaluate that you'd be a good fit for that program?
The first step is to really spend some time either in your senior year of undergrad or even sometime afterwards in the private sector, nonprofit sector, just trying to figure out what works for you and what doesn't, what interests you, and perhaps what do you miss about academia. And one of the ways that I evaluate that this program is right for me is because even though I focused so much time on China, even when I was in graduate school the first time, I realized that a lot of people were interested in me because I had spent some time researching China's engagement with Nepal, which is what I'm currently researching for my thesis, and even spend a couple of days in the country. And so I thought to myself, I even though I've been focused so much on China, like I could do an MA program to pivot. And also because I had experience taking legal coursework and competing in a moot competition in mainland China, I realized that, well, even though I ruled out becoming a lawyer, I really loved studying law and wanted to combine all of these interests together. And so with Cornell, the Asian Studies program allowed me to do that, even when this major is typically geared towards people who focus on linguistics, literature, history, the arts, and a lot of the people in my cohort have fascinating research goals and thesis ideas. But even though my idea went against the grain of what people typically pursue, I felt that I couldn't be in a better program, and especially with all of the flexibility I would want out of a program to balance both work considerations and personal life considerations. I'm really glad that I'm here, and that makes a lot of difference. And sometimes you have to talk to the right people to know that you fit into it, but you also have to know what you don't like, and then what you miss about academia most when you're out of it, even for just 2 or 3 years.
I think for me, when I was looking at all of the programs I might attend, it was really the advisor was my deciding feature. Kind of to repeat things that have been said, that relationship is so important, and to have someone who not only studies in, at least vaguely in the field that you study, but is also, kind of shows an interest in you, responds when you email them, which you should be emailing them, before, during, and after your application process, if you want to work with them. And you can kind of see their level of response. And if they're there for you before you attend, that's a really good sign that they're going to be there for you and support your studies while you're there.
Does anyone else want to? Okay, perfect. And then we have one more question, and then we'll move on to our general round. One attendee would like to know, are you involved in any clubs, organizations outside of your research? So while at grad school, are you involved in any clubs, organizations? And if so, which ones? And if you could elaborate on that, that'd be great.
I'm on the anti-racist, anti-colonialist, oh gosh, help me out, Anna. Anna's on it too. It's what is the full name? It's called ARCO. It's like a reading group and a planning group to implement anti-racist, anti-colonial methods and whatnot in archaeology.
Yeah, I would chime in about, so ARCO speaks to the point that I was maybe going to make about this, which is like, yes, I'm involved, but I'm not involved as widely as I was in undergrad, because it's way more focused on like stuff that actually, it's not, I'm just throwing resume builders onto my CV. It's stuff that I'm actually passionate about.
In terms of extracurricular activities for me, of course, I keep bringing up the MOOC court, and that's one. But in my first stint of grad school, alongside doing that competition, I also spent a lot of time in the symphony orchestra, and some of those connections, I mean, especially if it's a very informal kind of symphony orchestra in a university, such as the one I was in Nanjing University. Some of those connections I still take advantage of even today, and keep in touch with a lot of those people, because sometimes you might be able to connect to people through the most surprising ways. And just by keeping up with the violin, even on a very infrequent basis, and being in something like a string ensemble or an orchestra, even when you're in grad school, most likely in an MA program as opposed to a PhD, but I do know some PhD people who have been able to balance that. And it really connects you with all sorts of people, and you never know when these people are going to come back to help you. Even if it's not in your academic program, it might be years down the line when you're applying for jobs or anything like that. Especially in the private sector, but sometimes even in the academic realm as well.
There's a lot of research related stuff that you can do, and service related stuff that you end up getting pulled into, and advocacy stuff. So I'll do advocacy stuff as and when needed. I tend to do research for people when they need an extra researcher, and I edit and do like basically make research briefs and documents when people need that. And I've done that on and off for 5 years, which is not really fun. I don't do a lot of things for fun other than hang out with friends in non-organizational spaces. But in the English department, I know, for example, I've had friends, I went to watch one of my friends do roller derby. She did roller derby for like a solid year while being a PhD student, and it was amazing. Another one of my friends that I hang out with had a band, for a couple of years. This same friend also runs a micro press out of his house, and until recently I think still is in the skateboarding club. People do really cool things while they're in graduate school, because like I said, life happens when you're in graduate school. It's just about finding a balance and, making sure you're not getting burnt out and actually doing the things that energize you.
I'll say I'm not in any clubs or organizations that are completely removed from my research. However, they're all research adjacent. I'm also involved in a critical conversations group, is what we call it, our reading group that addresses some of the social issues and especially diversity. In my field, classics, there's some kind of ingrained issues in the field. But I also have taken part in reading groups both with professors and graduate students, and reading groups that I've organized myself just among fellow graduate students. And I think there's something to be said about each of those environments that, maybe one would work better for you. They might both work for different reasons, but the reading groups with professors are certainly, there's an added level of pressure that you feel like you sort of need to perform as if you were in class. Whereas a reading group with just fellow graduate students, you might be able to, really ask questions and be a little more vulnerable. However, I would advise you to just be as vulnerable and ask just as many questions with the professors, because likely if you had the question, somebody else in the room does. And that's always true, regardless of who's in the room.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you all panelists for answering those questions and giving great answers. I myself, and I think a lot of the attendees learned a lot. So we really appreciate you guys taking the time to answer these questions and give us some insight. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Preeta, and she's going to handle the general Q&A.
Hi, everyone. My name is Preeta, and I'm a junior studying human biology. So we're in our final session. So once again, thank you all to all the graduate students for sharing their valuable experiences and advice with our undergraduate students. And thank you, students, for asking such great questions. We will now open the floor to any questions you may have, either directed to a specific graduate student, a specific department, or in general about applying to graduate school. Again, please type your questions in the Q&A box found at the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and we will have our graduate students answer them for us. Oh, so we have one rollover question from one of the previous sessions is, how did you evaluate your fit with the program that you're in now? If anyone wants to jump in and answer that real quick.
I think we talked about that question in the previous session, right? Yeah.
Okay, great. It was just showing up as a rollover question. So what is something each graduate student enjoys about graduate school the most?
I get to work with collections, like artifacts. Like at one point I was doing it every single day, which is like the dream. Before I was just digging a bunch of holes in the woods, and that was great. I got to be outside, but sometimes we wouldn't find things. So I get to like do my own research. And yeah, I'm really enjoying the self-direction.
One of the nice things about Cornell is that it's got a pretty prestigious name. And so when I use that to talk to other professors in other countries or other universities, they respond a lot quicker than I would expect that they would. And I know some of my peers are working with very well-known individuals like Ben Bernanke and things like that. So the Cornell name brand goes really well if you're looking for that type of connection as far as to get things and produce at a level that's far higher than you would normally expect at just a regular school.
I just appreciate that I get to interact every day, or at least multiple times a week, with other people who are just as passionate about what I'm studying as I am, and I think it's really cool to get to know people who, or get to know people and know that I'll have a future being around people who are passionate about these topics.
I really like the teaching.
I won't lie, did not think that was going to be true, but I'm in a teaching intensive program. I also take on a lot of extra teaching because, you know, financial precarity, which means that I get to interact with a lot of really cool undergraduate students at different levels. And that has, I think I've taught independently 6 classes, sat in on like TA'd for 3, and then done language TAing for 1 more at this point. And so I've just met some really cool students who do really amazing things. And that's actually been a really great part of graduate school that was completely unanticipated.
I really enjoy the flexibility, especially in a multidisciplinary MA program, because with Cornell, even in professional schools, people are always welcoming to you and your requests. I barely had any trouble with interacting with law school students, faculty, librarians. They're just all so friendly, and at the same time, being able to combine my previous experience and still apply it to my current research. I'm still keeping up with Chinese in my current research, and there are still not necessarily classes, but other workshops to keep up with languages that if you want to pivot to another part of another focus or something like that, then you can still find ways to keep up with what you learned in undergrad or a previous graduate program. And that kind of flexibility is very instrumental to my own research.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, students, for sharing your experiences with us. I am going to now hand this over to Lizzie, my partner in the outreach committee, and she's just going to have the last few words to wrap up the graduate student panel.
Hi, everyone. We're a little bit over, so we have to conclude the event there. But thank you all so much for attending. We are so happy to have this event. I know we got a lot of feedback from our first one that focused on STEM, and a lot of students wanted to hear from the humanities and social sciences. So we're so glad that we were able to do this. A big thank you to all of our grad student panelists who took time out of their busy days or busy day to be here and just share their experiences with us. We're really grateful. So yeah, a virtual round of applause for them. And yeah, lastly, I just want to say that again, this event is recorded. If you guys want to visit our Curb YouTube channel very shortly after this, feel free to share with either like for the grad student panelists, you can share with your friends or just share with anyone who may find this event very valuable and when we're unable to make it. But yeah, that is all. Thank you again to all of our speakers and have a great night. Thank you.